I stood in the conference room, hands clenched at my sides, watching Marcus lean back in his chair with that infuriating smirk on his face. The HR representative, a nervous woman named Patricia, shuffled papers awkwardly, refusing to meet my eyes. "Madison, I think we both know this isn't working out," Marcus said, his voice smooth and practiced. "We don't see eye to eye on things. The team dynamic has become difficult." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what this was about. The dinner invitations I'd declined. The inappropriate comments I'd ignored. The text messages I'd never responded to. His hand on my lower back that I'd stepped away from. All of it leading to this moment. "We're going to have to let you go," he continued, sliding a termination letter across the table. "Effective immediately." Patricia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can pack up your things today. We'll escort you out." The words echoed in my head, surreal and devastating. I'd worked at Nexus Technologies for 4 years, building a solid reputation, earning promotions, leading successful projects. And now I was being fired because I'd refused my boss's advances. "This is retaliation," I said quietly, my voice shaking with suppressed anger. Marcus's smirk widened. "This is a business decision, Madison. Nothing personal." I walked back to my desk in a fog of shock and rage. Co-workers who'd been friendly just hours ago suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Eyes darted away when I looked up. Conversations died as I passed. The message was clear. I was already a ghost, someone to be avoided, someone whose downfall might be contagious. My hands trembled as I pulled a cardboard box from the supply closet. 4 years of my professional life reduced to this. Packing personal items while everyone pretended not to notice. A photo of my niece. A coffee mug from the team-building retreat. The award I'd received for exceeding quarterly targets. All of it felt meaningless now. But as I wrapped the frame in tissue paper, something shifted inside me. The shock began transforming into something harder, colder, more purposeful. I wasn't just angry. I was focused. Marcus thought he'd won. He thought firing me would be the end of it. A problem eliminated, a woman who'd rejected him properly punished. He assumed I'd slink away quietly, too humiliated and afraid to fight back. He was wrong. My mind snapped into action, already cataloging every inappropriate comment, every unwanted advance, every documented interaction that proved what he'd done. I wasn't going down quietly. Not even close. This was just the beginning. My name was Madison Clark. I was 38 years old, and I'd spent my entire career refusing to let anyone bully me into submission. I'd worked in tech for 15 years, navigating an industry that wasn't always welcoming to women, learning to advocate for myself while maintaining professionalism. But I'd never faced anything quite like Marcus Hamilton. The harassment had started subtly about 6 months ago, shortly after he'd been promoted to department head. "You look great today, Madison. That dress really shows off your figure." Comments I couldn't quite call out without seeming oversensitive. Then came the lunch invitations. "Just the two of us. We should discuss your career trajectory." I declined politely, citing busy schedules and existing lunch plans. The invitations persisted, became more insistent. "Dinner then. I know a great place downtown. Very private." I'd continued declining, my excuses growing thinner as his frustration grew more obvious. The emails started next. Messages sent late at night, ostensibly about work but with undertones that made my skin crawl. "Thinking about our conversation earlier. You have such unique insights. I'd love to explore your thoughts more deeply." I never responded to those emails. Never engaged beyond what was strictly professional. And that, apparently, had been my fatal mistake. In Marcus's world, rejection was unacceptable. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about integrity, dignity, and refusing to let powerful men abuse their positions without consequences. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began gathering documentation. Every inappropriate email Marcus had sent, I forwarded to my personal account. Every text message, I screenshotted. Every calendar invitation to private dinners or one-on-one strategy sessions outside the office, I saved. The evidence was damning once I compiled it chronologically. I could see the pattern clearly. Marcus escalating from compliments to invitations to increasingly personal messages. And I could see my responses: professional, brief, clearly uninterested. Never encouraging, always maintaining boundaries. But what struck me most was how carefully Marcus had avoided creating an official paper trail. None of his advances appeared in our company communication system. He'd used personal email addresses and his private cell phone. Every harassment claim existed off the record, in spaces where he could deny everything if challenged. That realization made my blood run cold. This wasn't impulsive behavior. This was calculated. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing and had structured his harassment to minimize evidence and maximize deniability. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I wouldn't document everything myself. I had months of messages, timestamps proving when they were sent, metadata showing they came from his personal accounts. I had evidence he couldn't erase or deny. The next morning, I met my co-worker Brianna for coffee at a shop far from the office. Brianna and I had started at Nexus around the same time and had always maintained a friendly, professional relationship. She was one of the few people who'd texted me after my firing, expressing shock and concern. "I can't believe they actually fired you," Brianna said, stirring her latte nervously. "Everyone knows you were one of the strongest performers in the department." "It wasn't about performance," I replied carefully, watching her reaction. Brianna's eyes widened with understanding. "Oh God. Marcus." I nodded. I turned down his advances. Multiple times. And this was his response. She was quiet for a moment, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Madison, he's done this before. Not the firing part. You're the first person I know he actually terminated. But the inappropriate behavior? The uncomfortable comments and invitations?" She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "There've been rumors for years. People talk quietly, but no one has ever officially stood up to him. He's too powerful, too connected with upper management. Would you be willing to confirm that if needed?" I asked. "If it came down to it?" Brianna hesitated, fear flickering across her face. Then something hardened in her expression. "Yes. If you're actually going to fight this, then yes. Someone needs to." That afternoon, I had a consultation with an employment attorney named Victoria Santos. Her office was small but professional, with diplomas from prestigious law schools on the walls and shelves lined with legal texts. Victoria listened intently as I explained the situation, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Madison, do you have proof of his advances? Actual documentation? Emails, text messages, witnesses who can corroborate the pattern of harassment?" My heart raced as I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. "I have everything." I spread the printed emails and screenshots across her desk. Messages from Marcus sent at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Can't stop thinking about our conversation. You're incredibly intelligent and beautiful. We should explore this connection." Another from a Friday night. "Disappointed you're not joining me for dinner. I could show you a side of the city, and myself, that you'd enjoy." Victoria's eyebrows rose as she read through them. "This is textbook sexual harassment. Unwanted advances, abuse of power dynamics, and the timing of your termination immediately following your continued rejection creates a clear retaliation case." She organized the documents carefully. "The challenge will be proving the connection between the harassment and your firing. Companies are sophisticated about manufacturing other reasons for termination." He claimed it was a business decision. Team dynamics. Victoria nodded. Standard script. "But with this documentation and witness testimony, we have a strong case." Over the next week, I became obsessive about gathering evidence. I printed every email, saved every message, and created a detailed timeline noting specific dates, times, and witnesses to each incident. I documented the progression of Marcus's behavior from seemingly innocent compliments to overtly inappropriate propositions. I noted every instance where I'd declined his invitations or failed to respond to his personal messages. I highlighted the pattern, how his behavior toward me in the office had grown colder and more critical after each rejection. Performance reviews that had been excellent suddenly included vague criticisms about team cohesion and receptiveness to leadership guidance. Project assignments that had been high-profile became routine and unremarkable. I'd been systematically marginalized in the months leading up to my firing. But I also discovered something else while reviewing my files: inconsistencies in how Marcus evaluated different team members. Women who accepted his dinner invitations or laughed at his inappropriate jokes received glowing reviews and bonuses. Women who maintained professional distance received mediocre evaluations despite excellent work. The favoritism was undeniable once I mapped it out. This evidence was stronger than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just harassed me, he'd created a toxic work environment that rewarded compliance with his advances and punished rejection. And I had the documentation to prove it. Meanwhile, Marcus was busy constructing his own narrative. I learned from Brianna that he'd told HR I was unprofessional and difficult to work with, that I'd failed to meet performance expectations, and had created interpersonal conflicts within the team. Patricia from HR had apparently accepted these explanations with minimal questioning. After all, Marcus was a respected department head with 5 years at the company. I was just an employee who'd been terminated for cause. The imbalance of power and credibility was obvious. But I knew the truth needed to be undeniable, presented in a way that left no room for ambiguity or alternative explanations. I couldn't just claim harassment, I needed to prove it so thoroughly that HR couldn't dismiss or minimize it. Victoria helped me craft a formal harassment complaint that was detailed, specific, and backed by comprehensive documentation. We organized everything chronologically, created exhibits for each category of misconduct, and included witness statements from people willing to go on record. "This reads like a legal brief," Victoria said with satisfaction. "That's intentional. We want HR to understand they're not dealing with an emotional complaint they can dismiss. They're dealing with a documented pattern of illegal behavior that could expose the company to significant liability." I felt a grim satisfaction. Marcus had underestimated me completely. He'd thought firing me would end the problem. Instead, it had freed me to fight without fear of further retaliation. As word of my firing spread quietly through the office, other employees began reaching out. Some were supportive. Others were cautiously curious about what had really happened. A few were brave enough to share their own experiences. A woman named Carla from accounting sent me a private message. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. Marcus made comments to me too, about a year ago. Nothing as persistent as what you described, but definitely inappropriate. I never reported it because I was afraid." Another colleague, Troy from the IT department, called me directly. "Madison, I've noticed Marcus gives preferential treatment to women who seem receptive to his attention. Better projects, bigger bonuses, faster promotions. I always thought it was suspicious, but I didn't want to make accusations without proof." These conversations revealed a pattern that extended beyond my individual experience. Marcus had created a culture where his harassment was an open secret, where people noticed but stayed silent out of fear, where professional advancement sometimes seemed contingent on tolerating inappropriate behavior. Together, we began building a collective story that couldn't be ignored. I wasn't just one disgruntled employee making accusations. I was part of a pattern, supported by witnesses who'd seen the same behavior, the same favoritism, the same toxic dynamic. The case was becoming stronger with each person who came forward. I contacted Nexus Technologies' legal department anonymously through their ethics hotline, carefully explaining the systemic harassment and providing my documented proof without initially revealing my identity. The hotline was supposed to be confidential and independent, designed for exactly these kinds of serious allegations. 2 days later, I received a callback from the legal department requesting a formal meeting. I agreed, this time identifying myself and bringing Victoria as my attorney. Meanwhile, Marcus noticed my absence from the office. Without the daily routine of seeing me at my desk, he apparently began to worry. He sent me a text message that made Victoria's eyes light up with prosecutorial glee. "Madison, this isn't over. You're making a big mistake by causing trouble. Think carefully about your next move. I forwarded the message to Victoria immediately. This is gold, she said. He's threatening you after terminating your employment. This demonstrates consciousness of guilt and continues the pattern of retaliation. Do not respond. Let him keep digging his own grave. I followed her advice, staying silent while Marcus apparently grew more agitated. According to Brianna, he'd become noticeably nervous in the office, snapping at subordinates and asking pointed questions about whether anyone had heard from me. His confidence was cracking. He knew something was wrong but didn't know exactly what I was planning. The uncertainty was eating at him. In public interactions, the few times I crossed paths with former colleagues at coffee shops or professional events, I maintained perfect composure. I smiled when people asked how I was doing. I spoke positively about exploring new opportunities. I never badmouthed Marcus or the company. Internally, I was documenting every interaction, taking notes, preparing my case with meticulous attention to detail. But externally, I was calm, professional, and seemingly unfazed by what had happened. This strategic approach served multiple purposes. It prevented Marcus from claiming I was unstable or emotional, standard defenses against harassment allegations. It demonstrated my professionalism to any colleagues who might later be called as witnesses. And most importantly, it caused Marcus to underestimate the threat I posed. One afternoon, I ran into him at a professional networking event. He approached me with false friendliness, clearly fishing for information about my plans. "Madison, good to see you," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "How's the job search going?" "Very well, thank you," I replied pleasantly. "I've had several promising conversations." "That's great. No hard feelings about how things ended, I hope." "Everything happens for a reason," I said, my smile serene. He had no idea I was recording the conversation on my phone, legally permissible in our one-party consent state. He had no idea that his casual confidence was about to become a liability. During my evidence gathering, I discovered something else: irregularities in Marcus's approval of bonuses and promotions. I'd maintained copies of team performance data from projects I'd managed, and I began cross-referencing that data with who'd received what rewards. The pattern was disturbing. A woman named Skylar had received a 15% bonus despite mediocre project results. Her performance reviews, which I'd seen during a team meeting, had been glowing. Skylar had also been one of the employees who'd accepted Marcus's dinner invitations and had been seen laughing at his jokes during office happy hours. Another woman, Keisha, had received excellent performance reviews and a substantial bonus despite having less experience than other team members. Keisha had also maintained a friendly relationship with Marcus that seemed to extend beyond professional bounds. Meanwhile, women who'd maintained strict professional distance, myself included, had received smaller bonuses despite objectively better results. The favoritism was quantifiable once I mapped it out with actual numbers and outcomes. This could be serious leverage. It demonstrated that Marcus's behavior wasn't just inappropriate on a personal level. It affected business decisions, created an unfair work environment, and potentially exposed the company to discrimination claims. I shared this analysis with Victoria, who immediately recognized its significance. "This shows a pattern of quid pro quo harassment," she explained. "Professional benefits in exchange for tolerating or accepting inappropriate behavior. That's illegal on multiple levels." 2 weeks after my termination, I scheduled what I called a friendly catch-up with Patricia from HR. I framed it as wanting to understand the reasons for my firing and discuss potential references for future employment. Patricia agreed, probably thinking I'd accepted my termination and was trying to move forward professionally. I arrived at her office with Victoria, which immediately changed the tone of the meeting. Patricia's friendly expression faltered when she saw my attorney. "I thought this was an informal conversation," Patricia said nervously. "It is," I replied calmly. "But given the circumstances of my termination, I thought it prudent to have legal representation present." I opened my folder and began presenting evidence in a neutral, non-emotional manner. The emails from Marcus. The text messages. The timeline of escalating harassment followed by sudden termination. The witness statements from colleagues confirming the pattern. Patricia's face went pale as she flipped through page after page of documentation. Her hands shook slightly as she read Marcus's more explicit messages. I wasn't aware of any of this, she stammered. Victoria spoke up. Miss Clark filed her initial complaint through your ethics hotline 2 weeks ago. The legal department should have informed you. They mentioned an anonymous complaint, Patricia admitted. But Marcus said it was a disgruntled employee making false accusations. He was very convincing. Look at the documentation, Victoria said firmly. This isn't one person's word against another. This is a documented pattern of illegal harassment. Over the following week, several co-workers wrote signed statements confirming Marcus's behavior. Brianna described witnessing his inappropriate comments to me and other women. Troy documented the favoritism in project assignments and bonuses. Carla detailed her own experience with Marcus's unwanted advances. Even people who'd been afraid to speak up initially found courage when they learned others were coming forward. The collective weight of these testimonies was devastating. Patricia, to her credit, seemed genuinely shocked and concerned once the full scope became clear. This is far more than we expected, she said during our follow-up meeting. And legally, we have to act on this. The company could face serious liability if we don't properly investigate. She explained that an independent investigation would be launched, that Marcus would be interviewed, and that all employees mentioned in the complaints would be contacted. I want to be clear, Patricia added, looking directly at me. I apologize for not taking your initial concerns more seriously. The way your termination was handled was inappropriate, and we're going to review all of Marcus's recent personnel decisions. Victoria nodded approvingly. We appreciate the company taking this seriously. However, my client reserves the right to pursue legal action depending on the outcome of this investigation. The message was clear. Nexus Technologies needed to make this right, or face the consequences in court. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer a terminated employee begging for fairness. I was someone with documented evidence of illegal behavior, supported by multiple witnesses, with legal representation and clear grounds for a lawsuit. Marcus started to panic. According to my sources still at the company, his demeanor changed dramatically once the investigation began. The confident, smirking department head became nervous and defensive. He micromanaged his team obsessively, probably trying to ensure their loyalty. He snapped at people over minor issues. He made uncharacteristic mistakes in meetings, forgetting details and losing his train of thought. One colleague told me he'd accidentally mentioned dealing with false accusations during a project update meeting, catching himself too late. The slip revealed what was consuming his thoughts. He was worried about the investigation, about the evidence mounting against him, about his carefully constructed image crumbling. His anxiety was obvious to everyone. People who'd previously admired or feared him now watched him with suspicion and doubt. The Whisper network that had once protected his secrets by staying silent now spread information about his downfall. He looks terrible, Brianna reported during one of our coffee meetups. Lost weight, dark circles under his eyes. He knows something big is happening but can't control it. It's eating him alive. I felt no sympathy. Marcus had wielded his power carelessly, hurting people without consequence for years. Now he was finally facing accountability, and the stress of that reality was destroying the confident facade he'd maintained for so long. I formally submitted my harassment complaint to Nexus Technologies with all supporting documentation, organized like a professional legal report. Timeline of incidents. Categories of misconduct. Witness statements. Evidence exhibits. Detailed analysis of the favoritism and retaliation. The complaint was 53 pages long, thoroughly researched, and impossible to dismiss as emotional or exaggerated. Victoria delivered it personally to both HR and the legal department, ensuring multiple people within the company had access to the full scope of the allegations. Marcus's smirk completely faded when HR scheduled a formal investigation meeting with him. According to the grapevine, he tried to decline the meeting, claiming he was too busy with important projects. HR informed him attendance was mandatory, and failure to cooperate would result in immediate termination. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days. The investigation was being conducted by an outside firm specializing in workplace harassment cases, ensuring independence and credibility. Marcus couldn't charm or intimidate these investigators the way he might have influenced internal HR staff. The playing field had leveled. I submitted to my own interview with calm professionalism, answering questions directly and referring to my documentation for specific details. The investigators were impressed by how organized and thorough my evidence was. Most complainants come to us with vague memories and emotional testimony, one investigator told me privately. You've built a case that would hold up in court. That's rare and valuable. Marcus attempted to fight back by trying to manipulate colleagues into testifying in his favor. He approached several employees, suggesting they could confirm I'd been difficult to work with, that I'd had performance issues, that my termination was justified. Some people complied out of fear for their own jobs. They gave statements supporting Marcus's version of events, painting me as problematic and unprofessional. But others refused. Brianna declined to participate in what she called character assassination. Troy told Marcus directly that he wouldn't lie for him. Carla simply didn't respond to Marcus's messages. The cracks were showing. Marcus had relied on his authority and people's fear to maintain control. But that authority was eroding rapidly as the investigation progressed. Employees who'd once feared him now saw him as vulnerable. His attempts at manipulation became increasingly desperate and obvious. One employee he'd pressured to support him instead went to the investigators and reported the pressure, adding witness tampering to the list of Marcus's questionable behavior. Another recorded their conversation with Marcus, where he'd explicitly asked them to remember things differently than they actually happened. Each attempt Marcus made to defend himself only dug his hole deeper. He was used to being the one with power, with control, with the ability to shape narratives. Now that power was gone, and he was flailing. Then came the surprise witness who changed everything. A woman named Olivia, who'd worked at Nexus 3 years ago, came forward anonymously through the ethics hotline. She'd seen news of the investigation through professional networks and decided to share her own experience. Olivia had been fired by Marcus after refusing his advances, just as I had been. But she'd been too afraid to fight back at the time, worried about her career and reputation. She'd signed a non-disparagement agreement as part of her severance package and had stayed silent. Now, learning that someone was finally standing up to Marcus, she decided to break her silence despite the legal risk. He told me I wasn't a team player, Olivia wrote in her statement. That my attitude was affecting department morale. But the truth was, I'd turned down his dinner invitation and stopped responding to his personal messages. 2 weeks later, I was terminated. Her testimony was devastating because it proved this wasn't an isolated incident. Marcus had a pattern spanning years. He'd been systematically abusing his power, harassing women who reported to him, and retaliating against those who rejected him. HR's eyes went wide when they read Olivia's statement. The legal department immediately realized the company's potential liability. They'd allowed this behavior to continue, paid severance to silence at least one victim, and failed to properly investigate previous complaints. We're seeing a pattern now, Patricia admitted during an update meeting. A systematic abuse of power. The company has to take this seriously. Marcus made a critical error in his growing panic. He sent me an email from his work account, clearly written in anger and frustration, without thinking through the consequences. Madison, you're destroying my career over nothing. I was nothing but professional with you. If you continue with these false accusations, you'll regret it. I have connections in this industry. You'll never work in tech again. The threat was explicit and documented. I forwarded it immediately to both Victoria and the investigation team. The investigators' response was swift. They called an emergency meeting with Marcus and confronted him about the threatening communication. He tried to claim he'd been emotional and hadn't meant it literally, that it was just venting frustration. But the damage was done. His arrogance, his certainty that he could intimidate me into silence, was now permanently documented in company records. This demonstrates exactly the kind of retaliatory behavior Ms. Clark alleged, the lead investigator noted in her report. Mr. Hamilton continues to abuse his position even after being warned that he's under investigation. Victoria was thrilled. He keeps providing us with new evidence. It's like he can't help himself. His ego won't let him accept that he's lost control of the situation. The email became a centerpiece of the case, proof that Marcus's behavior toward me was personal, vindictive, and ongoing even after my termination. The formal investigation took 6 weeks total. During that time, investigators interviewed 37 current and former employees, reviewed thousands of emails and documents, and examined Marcus's entire employment history with the company. What they uncovered was worse than anyone had imagined. Marcus had created a toxic work environment where success often depended on tolerating his inappropriate behavior. Where women faced a choice between accepting unwanted advances or facing career consequences. Where complaints were dismissed or buried. The investigators documented multiple instances of inappropriate behavior toward at least 7 different women. They found evidence of favoritism in project assignments, bonus allocations, and promotion decisions that correlated directly with employees' receptiveness to Marcus's advances. They discovered he'd been warned verbally by a previous HR manager about his behavior 3 years ago but faced no formal consequences. Most damning, they uncovered a recording I'd completely forgotten about. 2 years earlier, during a team happy hour, Marcus had made an inappropriate comment about my appearance while somewhat drunk. I'd recorded it on my phone at the time, thinking I might need evidence someday, then forgotten about it in the chaos of daily work. The recording captured Marcus saying, in front of several colleagues, "Madison, if you just go to dinner with me, I could really accelerate your career. You're talented, but you need the right mentorship. The kind that happens outside the office." The investigators listened to the recording in stunned silence. It was smoking gun evidence of quid pro quo harassment, explicit linkage between accepting his advances and professional advancement. The final confrontation happened in the executive boardroom. Marcus sat with his attorney, looking haggard and defeated. I sat with Victoria, calm and composed, letting the evidence speak for itself. The investigation committee included the VP of Human Resources, the General Counsel, and an outside employment attorney representing the company's interests. They presented their findings methodically and devastatingly. 37 pages detailing Marcus's pattern of harassment, retaliation, favoritism, and abuse of power. Testimony from multiple witnesses. Documentary evidence including emails, text messages, and that damning recording. Analysis of his personnel decisions showing clear discrimination based on employees' responses to his advances. "Mr. Hamilton, the evidence against you is overwhelming and undeniable," the General Counsel said. "You violated company policy, created a hostile work environment, and exposed Nexus Technologies to significant legal liability." Marcus tried to respond, stammering something about misunderstandings and false interpretations. His attorney looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "The investigation committee finds that you engaged in systematic sexual harassment of multiple employees, abused your authority for personal gratification, and retaliated against Ms. Clark for refusing your inappropriate advances by terminating her employment," the VP of HR continued. Victoria and I remained silent, letting the company's own conclusions validate everything I'd alleged. The committee didn't need our arguments. The evidence had done all the work. Marcus realized this was bigger than a simple HR complaint. This could ruin his career permanently. His face crumbled as the reality finally hit him. Marcus was suspended immediately pending final review. The suspension was technically pending, but everyone knew what was coming. He was escorted from the building that afternoon, his belongings packed in the same type of cardboard box I'd used. Colleagues who'd once feared him now watched openly as he left. Some with satisfaction, others with pity, but all with a new understanding of who he really was. The whispers of admiration for my poise and courage began spreading through the office. People who'd avoided me after my firing now reached out with apologies and support. "I should have said something when you were terminated," Brianna told me. "I knew it was wrong, but I was scared. I'm sorry." Others echoed similar sentiments. The culture was shifting, people recognizing that staying silent enabled abuse, that collective action was necessary to stop powerful people from hurting others. Meanwhile, Marcus attempted to salvage his reputation. He contacted former colleagues at other companies, trying to charm them into providing references and character witnesses. Most refused once they heard even vague details about the investigation. His professional network, once so valuable and extensive, was closing against him. People distanced themselves from the scandal, protecting their own reputations by severing ties with someone credibly accused of serial harassment. His attempts to charm HR during the investigation had failed miserably. His confident explanations had been dismantled by documented evidence. His denials had been contradicted by multiple witnesses. There was nowhere left to hide. 3 months after my termination, Nexus Technologies announced their decision. Marcus Hamilton was fired for sexual harassment, abuse of power, and creating a hostile work environment. The termination was for cause, meaning no severance package, no positive references, no negotiated exit. He was simply gone, his reputation destroyed, his career effectively over in the industry. Additionally, the company issued a formal apology to me, acknowledging that my termination had been retaliatory and unjustified. They offered full reinstatement with back pay for the 3 months I'd been unemployed, restoration of all benefits, and a promotion to senior director level, 2 levels above my previous position. "We deeply regret how this situation was handled," the VP of HR wrote in the official letter. "Ms. Clark's treatment was unacceptable, and we're committed to ensuring nothing like this happens again at Nexus Technologies." The company also implemented new policies: mandatory harassment training for all employees, an independent ethics hotline managed by outside counsel, regular audits of personnel decisions to identify potential discrimination patterns, and a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation. Marcus's downfall was complete. His name would forever be associated with abuse of power and sexual harassment. Future employers would discover the truth during background checks. His LinkedIn profile, once full of impressive accomplishments, would be viewed through the lens of why he really left Nexus. His professional reputation was ruined, not loudly or dramatically, but thoroughly and permanently. I declined immediate reinstatement. Instead, I leveraged my experience and newfound reputation for integrity into a higher-paying position at TechVision Industries, one of Nexus's main competitors. The CEO had followed the story through industry networks and personally recruited me, impressed by how I'd handled the situation. "We need people with your principles and courage," she told me during the interview. "Someone who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult. That's the kind of leadership we value." The position came with a 25% salary increase, better benefits, stock options, and a clear path to executive leadership. More importantly, it came with respect. At TechVision, I wasn't the woman who'd been fired for rejecting her boss. I was the professional who'd exposed harassment, protected other victims, and changed an entire company's culture. Former colleagues from Nexus cheered my success. Many reached out to congratulate me and thank me for what I'd done. "You made it safer for all of us," Carla wrote. "You showed that we don't have to tolerate abuse, that we can fight back and win." Meanwhile, Marcus was desperate and powerless. According to the professional grapevine, he'd applied to dozens of positions and been rejected from all of them once his background came to light. He'd tried consulting work but couldn't get clients once they learned about the harassment allegations. His savings were dwindling. His professional reputation was unsalvageable. The man who'd once had the power to destroy my career now couldn't even get an interview. 6 months after everything began, I sat in my new corner office at TechVision Industries, looking out over the city skyline, and reflected on everything that had happened. I hadn't just fought for my job. I'd fought for respect, for boundaries, for my dignity, and for every other woman who'd been harassed into silence by powerful men who thought they were untouchable. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd known. That documenting evidence and building a methodical case was more powerful than emotional confrontation. That staying calm and professional while gathering proof could be devastating to those who expected tears and surrender. Most importantly, I'd learned my worth. Not the worth Marcus tried to assign me based on whether I accepted his advances. Not the worth Nexus initially gave me when they accepted his lies. But my real worth, as a professional, as a leader, as someone with integrity and courage. I'd won on my terms, through strategy and evidence rather than spite or revenge. Marcus's downfall was simply the natural consequence of his own actions, exposed to the light where they couldn't be denied or dismissed. My phone buzzed with a message from Olivia, the former employee who'd come forward during the investigation. "Thank you for giving me the courage to speak up. I finally feel free of what he did to me." I smiled, feeling genuinely proud. This had never been just about me. It had been about changing a culture, protecting others, and proving that even powerful people face consequences when victims refuse to stay silent. That was the real victory. Not revenge, but justice, integrity, and the knowledge that I'd made things better for everyone who came after me.